Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to Special Collections here at the main library. I'm Gary Chin, Public Relations and Development Manager here at the libraries. And thank you for coming for tonight's talk. And I know this is going to be a very interesting topic, so I'm not going to delay any further, and I'd like to introduce our moderator, Professor Ho, Clara Ho from Baptist U. Okay? So I'll turn it over to Professor Ho.
Okay, thank you very much, Gary. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening, and welcome to this book talk. I'm very much honored to be asked to facilitate this event and to give a brief introduction of Professor HKUL, our distinguished speaker tonight. Professor HKUL is the Louise Boydell and Alfred Lichtenstein Chair Professor of Chinese and Japanese and Chair of the Department of Chinese and Japanese, Vassar College. It's a beautiful college, Vassar. Yeah. She is the recipient of a number of honors and grants, including a Chinese American Librarians Association Best Book Award, National Endowment for the Humanities Fellowship, the Japan Society for the Promotion of Science Fellowship, Columbia University President's Fellowship, and the Japan Foundation Fellowships. She is the author of Basho and the Tao, the Zhuangzi, and the Transformation of Haikai, published by the Hawaii University Press in 2005. She has published many research articles in English, Japanese, and Chinese, and, of course, the distinguished book we are featuring tonight, Chinese Comfort Women, Testimonies from Imperial Japan's Sex Slaves. Chinese Comfort Women was first published by the University of British Columbia Press in 2013. In July 2014, Oxford University Press and Hong Kong University Press released its paperback edition in the USA and Asia respectively. The Chinese edition, 日本帝国的性奴隶，中国慰安妇的证言, has just been released by the Hong Kong University Press this year. The authors of Chinese Comfort Women include Professor Chiu, who is the speaker tonight, and Su Zhiliang of the Shanghai Normal University, and Chen Lifen, also of the Shanghai Normal University. The Chinese edition is translated by Professor Chiu with the assistance of Zhou Youli, Vassar College. Chinese Comfort Women exposes the full extent of the injustices suffered by women forced into sexual servitude by the Japanese military in mainland China and the conditions that caused them. During the Asia-Pacific War, the Japanese military forced hundreds and thousands of women across Asia into comfort stations where they were repeatedly raped and tortured. Japanese imperial forces claimed they recruit women to join these stations in order to prevent the mass rape of local women and the spread of venereal disease among soldiers. In reality, these women were kidnapped and coerced into sexual slavery. Comfort stations institutionalized rape, and these comfort women were subject to atrocities that have only recently become the subject of international debate. Chinese comfort women consists of three parts. Part 1 traces the establishment of the military comfort women system in China. Part 2 features the personal narratives of 12 women forced into sexual slavery when the Japanese military occupied their hometowns. Unfortunately, most of these 12 ladies have passed away since then. Part 3 documents the survivors' post-war lives and the comfort women redress movement in China. Chinese Comfort Women is the first English language account of its kind. We do have a series of scholarly works on Japanese, Korean, and Filipino comfort women, for example, delivered in English. However, we have to wait until the release of Chinese Comfort Women before this important perspective on the war is made available to English-speaking readers. Since its publication in 2014, Chinese Comfort Women has been very well received. The book was named as a best book of the year by the Chinese American Librarians Association in 2014. Moreover, it was positively reviewed in Publishers Weekly, Wall Street Journal, the China Quarterly, Pacific Affairs, Library Journal, Women's Review of Books, and Choice. The Choice comments are especially illuminating. Quote, "The keen attention the authors paid to the notion of gender and sexuality in wartime and post-war Chinese socio-political system makes this book not only an interrogation of war crimes committed by Japanese troops, but also a critical reflection on the injustice to women perpetuated by local patriarchal society and masculine nationalist history writing. This well-researched, well-structured book is indispensable for teaching modern East Asian history and politics and for rethinking organized violence." End of quote. And the choice rating of Chinese Comfort Women is essential, the highest rating. So congratulations. Without further delay, let us invite Professor Chiu to share with us the success of her award-winning book. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Hall, for a very generous and kind introduction. And I would also like to take this opportunity to thank Hong Kong University Press for everyone there, their kind support to the publication of this book, both in English edition and the Chinese edition. Thank you. And I thank everybody who are here today. I heard this is university's reading week. Professors and students supposed to have other engagements, but people make time to be here to hear this sad stories. I appreciate your care. So, first of all, I would like to start from what is the comfort woman, the terms. I'm sure many of you in the audience already heard of the term, but I was told that there's also people from general public, so I start from the terms. During the Asian Pacific War, hundreds of thousands of women were coerced into Japanese Imperial military comfort stations. They were referred to as comfort women and subjected to repetitive rapes. As seen on the screen, comfort woman is the English translation of the Japanese euphemism, 慰安妇. In Chinese, we use the same character. And the Korean language also use some character. This reading is 慰安妇. These women were coerced into sexual servitude by the Japanese troops into the so-called comfort stations. Both the comfort woman and the comfort station are clearly inappropriate terms. But these terms has been used in recent decades in the international debate, legal discourse, and the scholarly research, specifically refer to the sexual slaves during the Asian Pacific War. So in the book, I still use the term with the quotation mark at first occurrence in English, and in Chinese, quotation marks throughout, to indicate that this is a term that's not acceptable, not only to the survivors, but also to researchers, but now use it as a term for research. So what is comfort station? What happened to these women in the comfort stations? Let's read a paragraph from this 1941 Chinese journal article I found in the Columbia Library database. The article reports on a military comfort station in Japanese-occupied Tongcheng, Hubei province in China. So here is the translation of the article, a part of the article. you can see the article says most of the women who were used as the comforting objects in this comfort station are drafted by force from the local area by the Association for Maintaining Order. In Chinese, it's 治安维持会, and the comforting objects is the literal translation of the original 慰安品. These women are allowed to go home after being enslaved in the comfort station for a certain time, but they must have at least 5 warrantors to guarantee that they would be sent back to the station. If a released woman is not sent back 3 days after the due date, all the warrantors and their family members would be buried alive, and the members of the Association for Maintaining Orders would also be punished. During the days in service, a comfort woman is raped by some 60 soldiers. She is forced to smile while being raped, and if she shows the slightest unwillingness, she would be stripped naked and raped ruthlessly, and she would not be permitted to go home for 3 weeks. The above is a translation, but this kind of story are many. So I give another example. This is a picture of Tan Yuhua, whose story is related in the book. Survivor Tan Yuhua was 16 when the Imperial Japanese Army raided her hometown, Yaojiaguan, Yiyang County, Hunan Province, in 1944. Her father, unable to move fast because he was disabled, he has a crippled leg. So her father became easy prey for the soldiers. They forced him to kneel down and threatened to kill him with a sword. Tan Yuhua couldn't help crying out from her hiding place, and thus was also caught by the soldiers. She was locked in a military comfort station in the nearby town, Zhuliangqiao, together with other abducted women and girls, where she was forced to service a Japanese officer as his sex slave. I met Tan Yuhua in 2008 in Shanghai. When recounting her experience, she said, "One of my aunts died during that attack. The soldiers arrested my father and forced him to work for them. But he was unable to perform hard labor due to his disabled leg. So the Japanese soldiers killed him. I lost my father forever." I still remember her face. She didn't cry, but her face frozen in deep sorrow. Tan Yuhua passed away in 2014. Tan Yuhua's experience was not an isolated one. The Japanese military sex slavery system victimized an extensive area. The shaded area in the map indicates the occupied territory of Japanese Empire during the war. And this map is produced by Women's Active Museum in Japan. Women drafted from China and Korean Peninsula are the largest victim groups, but there are also large numbers of women drafted from other places. It has been confirmed that the comfort station was set up in many Asian countries and regions, including mainland China, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Macau, the Philippines, British Malaya, the Dutch East Indies, Singapore, Thailand, French Indochina, Burma, New British Island, New Guinea, Sakhalin Island, Truk Island, and Japan. Information about comfort women appeared sporadically in memoirs, artwork, magazine, articles and films and film monograph after Japan was defeated. But it's only with the rise of the conflict women redress movement initiated by Korean and Japanese female feminists and scholars in the early 1990s, the issue has received worldwide attention. From the early 1990s, a large quantity of scholarship in English has been published on the issue. But these works focus mainly on the former Korean and Japanese conflict women, leaving the experience of an extremely large number of Chinese women virtually unknown to non-Chinese speaking audiences. This situation, I found, seriously impeded a fuller understanding of the complicated issue. When I started to do the research, I was often asked by reporters and readers why you, as a literature person, started to research on conflict woman issue. It was during 2003. One of my students, who is Asian Studies major at Vassar College, wrote a senior graduation thesis on South Korea and the Japanese women's redress movement. At the time, I and my colleague, Song Seok-hoon, who is a Korean-American professor, served as the students' thesis advisors. So during that process, I read many publications in English, Japanese, and Chinese. I realized that very little, virtually none, of the English publication deals with Chinese women's experience. So at that time, I thought this is a problem because the war was fought on mainland China for near 15 years, more than 14 years. And we know that the large number of Chinese people were victimized, including the women. But there's little known outside of China about the historical truth. I thought this is someone has to have tell the story, but I didn't think that's my work because I'm a literature person. I thought some historians writing the book. However, a couple of years passed after my student graduated. By the time of 2006-07, there's still no English book on the topic. So I decided to help to tell the story. That's how I started to write about this book. So, since the conflict woman issue is brought to the international attention, there has been serious debate between the scholars, activists, and the ultra-nationalists in Japan. The key debates basically are two. One is whether the women were forced into the conflict stations by the Japanese military, and the other, whether these women were prostitutes or sex slaves. While progressive scholars, legal specialists, and human rights advocates characterize the conflict station and the system as sexual slavery, Japanese government officials claim that no documentary evidence has been discovered to prove direct involvement of the Japanese government and the military authorities in forcing the women into conflict stations. And outside the government circles, Japanese conservative writers and nationalist activists have argued that conflict women were professional prostitutes in war zone brothels run by private agencies, and that neither the state nor the military forced the woman to be there. So it's a completely different story told. This is a clip from the internet. You can see that the Japanese public broadcast, NHK, has banned any reference to the notorious rape of Nanjing to the country's use for wartime sexual slaves and to its territorial dispute with China. This is a couple of years ago in 2014, but that kind of denial continues. The next slide is relatively recent. It's summer this year. In June 2017, the interview with a reporter at the Japanese consulate in Buckhead, Consulate General of Japan, Takashi Shinotsuka, said, "The women were not sex slaves and not taken by force. Maybe you know that in Asian culture, in some countries, we have girls who decide to go to take this job to help their family." More disturbing is that young people who do not know the historical truth have been led in the wrong direction. A report on Japan Today writes that a group of demonstrators paraded through Tokyo's Ikebukuro district last Sunday, criticizing China and South Korea while advocating the restoration of the Great East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere, 大东亚共荣圈. People who know Chinese know that is the pro-war slogan during the Asian Pacific War. So for many of us who were born after the war, the sufferings of the comfort woman and the horror of the war are remote and hard to believe. It often seems to be easier to set them aside, or at the very least, to assign them to the past. However, suffering of such a scale, such a magnitude, should not and cannot be dismissed. What we choose to recognize and to remember from the past not only affect our present, but also shapes our future. The point of telling stories for comfort women today is not to disgrace the people of Japan, because right now, Japanese government officials speak everywhere, especially on the site for comfort women memorials, on the textbook where comfort woman's experience was described, saying that any mention for the comfort woman is disgracing Japanese people, which is very wrong. Just like when we remembering the comfort woman, just like we are remembering the victims of the Holocaust and the atomic bomb. When we're doing that, we are not disgracing America or Germany. Rather, it is to facilitate mutual understanding between Japanese people and Asian neighborhoods. To those who genuinely hope to resolve the problem associated with the Imperial Japan's wartime comfort woman and to come to terms with the trauma of the past, I think it's essential to transcend the posturing of the nation state and to recognize that the suffering caused by the war is a violation of human life. Only by recognizing the sufferings of comfort women can we begin to understand the reality of the wartime comfort stations and the nature of the military comfort woman system. So the book, as some reviewers noted, is trying to give voice to Chinese women for the first time, at least in English. The book consists of 3 parts. First part traces the establishment of the military comfort woman system in China from the very early stage of Japan's aggression in Manchuria and Shanghai, that is 1932, to its rapid expansion after the Nanjing massacre in 2037, and to Japan's defeat in 2045. So the comfort station runs through the entire war period. The book brings to light several previously unknown or hidden aspects of the comfort woman system. For example, the ransoms that the occupying army forced the victim family to pay. Not only the woman didn't receive any payment for their forced prostitution, their families, this is the case in occupied territory in China, their family, when they try to rescue this woman, they are forced to pay ransom to the occupation army. And also the various types of improvised comfort stations set up by small military units throughout the battle zones and occupied regions, and the sheer scope of the military sexual slavery, much larger than previously assumed. These facts are all reviewed by the Chinese woman's experience. Earlier works treating other women from Japan or Japan's colonies, focusing mainly on the relatively formal comfort stations. But in the case of Chinese women, they were often confined into these temporary frontline comfort stations where the most brutal torture occurred. Part 2 of the book features the personal narratives of 12 women forced into sexual slavery when the Japanese military occupied their hometowns, beginning with their pre-war lives and continuing through their enslavement to their post-war struggles for justice. These interviews also reveal that the prolonged sufferings of the comfort station survivors was not limited to the wartime atrocities, but was rather a lifelong condition, resulting from various social, political, and cultural factors. And in last part 3, I document the survivors' post-war lives and the comfort woman redress movement in China. The personal narratives of these survivors, combined with the testimonies of witnesses, investigative reports, and local histories, reveal a clear correlation between the proliferation of the comfort stations and the progression of Japan's military offensive. I try to provide readers with multiple layers of analysis to examine the political and historical background of the comfort station in China during the invasion, the survivors' narrative, and the contemporary forms for justice seeking. Let me talk a little bit about the source materials of the book, because that's one of the often asked questions. So in writing the first part, the historical outline of the Second Sino-Japanese War in China, we used to call it Resistance War or Anti-Japanese War. So my outline is based on the latest scholarship that brought together the perspective of Japanese, Chinese, and Western scholars, such as China and the War, Regions of China, and the Battle for China, essays on military history of the Sino-Japanese War of 1937 to 1945. Both of the books are published by Stanford University Press. And the discussion of the establishment and expansion of Japanese military comfort system draws upon both wartime documents and to source materials preserved and unearthed by individual scholars and by archives in China, Japan, and America. This picture, for example, is a wartime war criminals interrogation record kept in the Central Archives of China. It shows that between 1942 to 1945, 1945, the last 3 years of the war, under the supervision of Hirose Saburo, a former Japanese officer of the 59th Division of Japanese Army. 127 comfort stations were set up at 11 places in Shandong province. And from 1944 to 1945, Hirose Saburo was in charge of the management of a military comfort station named Star Club, in Chinese term, 新俱乐部, in Jinan City, which is a big city in Shandong. In that one comfort station, 50 Chinese women between the age of 16 and 23 were held. So you can see if this one military officer set up 127 comfort stations, and each of them confined 50 women, you can imagine over the period of 15, 14 years in the entire war zone, how many countless women were victimized. And this is a picture of a 1937 Japanese military map that has the location of the very first comfort station, Dai Shalong, Daiichi in Japanese. This is a photo preserved by a journalist in Shanghai, his personal property. And he let us take a picture. So when knitting together a range of primary sources only available in Chinese and secondary sources available in Japanese, Chinese, and English, I also drew upon scholarly works, archive documents, legal investigations, witness testimonies, and local histories to piece together historical narratives, and providing an interdisciplinary analysis of the scope, nature, and prevalence of comfort stations in China. And also documenting the lived experiences, both historical and contemporary, of the comfort women survivors. The experience of Chinese victims show undeniably that the comfort woman system was a war crime. There's no doubt about it. There was a close correlation between the proliferation of the comfort woman system and the progression of Japan's military offensive. Although the woman's experience varied during the war. Some were abducted into the station, others were deceived. Some were raped several times a day, others as many as 16 times. And some were detained for days, weeks, and others for years. But the unspeakable atrocities under the comfort woman system were crime against humanity. And some reviewers has commented that this is the first book that placed the survivors' narratives directly in the context of the war. In compiling these narratives and translating their personal account, I try to provide a short outline of the wartime history in the local area of each woman at the beginning of the oral account, which effectively demonstrates the correlation between the woman's suffering and the Imperial Japan's aggression in China. These are the 12 women whose stories were told in the book. These women's accounts were collected by Professor Su Ziliang and Chen Lifei in Shanghai Normal University over the period of about 10 years. Professor Su and Chen has been coordinating Chinese researchers in China and played a very important role in the investigation of the comfort woman issue. So this is a map showing the location where these women were abducted. as you can see in the map, an extremely large number of women were abducted by force, coerced, or deceived into the comfort stations from almost the entire occupied regions. Among the 12 women, Lei Guiying and Yuan Zhulin were deceived into the comfort stations. According to our investigation, the vast majority of Chinese women were literally kidnapped from their homes when the Japanese army occupied their home village or hometown. But there are a small number of women, they were looking for jobs and they were deceived they thought they are going to do cleaning work or nursing work or maids, but then they were detained in the comfort stations. In order to reflect the reality more objectively, we included 2 cases or deceived into comfort stations. So research findings in China shows that the number of women the Japanese troops enslaved is much larger than previously estimated. Estimates made in the 1990s was based on the ratio of 1 woman to 29 Japanese soldiers. In Japanese term, it's called the nikuichi, a term widely used by Japanese military men during the war. Nikuichi literally means 29 to 1, which was believed to be the ratio commonly used by the Japanese forces when drafting comfort women. This is Professor Yoshimi's research in Japan. And a Korean person lived in Japan, a scholar called Kim Yin-myao, suggests that if the total number of Japanese soldiers were 3 million, then according to the Nikuichi ratio, the number of comfort women would have been nearly 103,000. And a conservative Japanese scholar, Hata Ikuhiko, comes up with 2 estimates: 60,000 based on 1 to 50 ratio, or 90,000 with a 1.5 replacement rate. So the replacement rate here is an issue when different scholars estimate about numbers. Yoshimi Yoshiaki, who is a leading scholar in comfort women research in Japan, and his contribution is very important. He suggested that if the replacement rate was 1.5, then the total number of comfort women would have been 3 million divided by 29 and times 1.5, or that equals to 155,000 women. If the replacement rate were 2.0, then the total number would be more than 200,000. So that is 200,000 is the number probably you often hear, right? But investigation in China in the past 2 decades, because the Chinese investigation started later than the Japanese and Korean scholars, so some of the investigation result findings were not fully included in the early estimation. And based on the Chinese women's experience, some Chinese scholars, for example, Professor Su Zhiliang, suggest that the replacement rate should be much higher, should be 3.5 or 4. So with that replacement rate, he suggests that the total number could be as high as 400,000. That's how you hear the different numbers. In the book, I emphasize that whether it's 20,000 or 200,000, it doesn't change the nature of sexual slavery. It's a serious crime against humanity. But because the number concerns the scope of the victimization, Chinese scholars also made effort to import more information. For example, researchers at the Hebei Provincial Academy for Social Sciences report that the Japanese army frequently detained 10 to 20 women in each stronghold to be their sex slaves. This is not the formal combat station. It's where the Japanese troops stationed in the barracks. They built many of them, especially in North China, where the resistance forces were very active. So by the end of 1943, in the South Hebei region alone, the Japanese army had built 1,103 strongholds. The total number of such strongholds constructed during the war in South China would, according to He Tianyi, the researchers' investigation, would at least have exceeded 10,000, which means that in those strongholds alone, about 100,000 or 200,000 Chinese women would have been enslaved. So I personally think a specific number is almost impossible to obtain, since the investigation didn't take place immediately after the war, and many survivors passed away, and information not available. However, it would not be an exaggeration to say hundreds of thousands of women, not only Chinese, Korean, and there's also women from other part of Asia, Southeast Asia, were victimized by this so-called comfort woman system. And besides these strongholds, many small Japanese military units set up various temporary comfort facilities wherever they were stationed. Some just a temporary shade. They put the women on the ground and rape them day and night on the ground. So this is one of the pictures taken at a formal comfort station. This is old temple turned into a temporary comfort station where the survivor, Yuan Zhulin, whose stories was told in the book, were confined there. And this is the picture for local villagers' cave dwelling in Shanxi province, which was used as a temporary military comfort station, where Wan Aihua, who is also a survivor, told us her experience in the book. She was confined in this villager's residence. In these temporary comfort stations, women were brutally tortured. The picture shows Wan Aihua showing her ears, which was deformed by the beating and torture. How is time going? So now I would like to share a short part of Liu Mianhuan's story. Liu Mianhuan is not one of the 12 women whose account of their life is told more fuller in the book, but I included her story in the foreword of the book. Liu Mianhuan was the only child of her parents. Before turning 16, she was abducted before her mother's eyes into the Imperial Japanese Army's stronghold, where she was kept captive and became one of the soldiers' comfort women. She recalled at our interview, saying, "We walked for about 3 or 4 hours under the soldiers' guard to the Japanese military strongholds in Jingui village, where we were confined in cave dwellings," the dwelling like the picture I saw earlier. "Several military men raped me that day. They hurt me so much, and I was so scared that I wished I could find a hole in the ground to hide myself. From that day on, the Japanese troops raped me every day. Each day, at least 5 or 6 men would come, and the commander usually came at night. The torture made my private part infected and my entire body swollen. The pain in my lower body was excruciating, to the point that I could neither sit nor stand. Since I could not walk, when I need to go to the latrine, I had to crawl on the ground. What a living hell. Why did these women's stories remain unknown? Everybody, when read the book and heard their stories, would ask this question. After the World War II, the International Military Tribunal for the Far East stopped short ruling the leaders of Japanese military and the government as responsible for the perpetuation of the military comfort woman system. So there has been various kind of analysis of this issue. For example, some scholars suggest that this is the result of racial prejudice, since most of the victims of this enforced sexual slavery were not white women, but actually there were some white women from Southeast Asia, for example, Dutch descendant. And in Hong Kong, there's some British nurse who was raped and confined as comfort woman. And others suggest that the patriarchal view of gender are deeply rooted in military forces of all nations, and that view fostered a general insensitivity to women's rights. And also, a recent study on the Tokyo trial suggests that the prosecutors representing the victimized nations failed to introduce sufficient evidence at the court because they focused on the major cases, such as the Nanjing massacre, for example. And also, an Australian scholar suggests rape did not fit the dominant discourse of post-conflict justice, nor did it conform to the political will of the victors. Of course, we all know that immediately after the war, the international political situation changed. The Western politicians concentrated on Cold War strategy, which required the help of their former enemies, including Japan. That also played a role on the issue. Consequently, issues surrounding comfort women remained unacknowledged. Justice has not been served, and the resulting lack of compensation left the survivor suffering severe hardship. This little house is where Zhu Qiaomei, survivor Zhu Qiaomei, lived after the war. Zhu Qiaomei and her husband used to own a little restaurant on Chongming Island near Shanghai. But the Japanese troops destroyed her family restaurant and forced her to be the comfort woman in her own house. She was called to serve the military men and officers from her own house. This is a Zhu Qiaomei at her door, looking for the day justice to come. But she passed away without seeing that. How long is it now?
Yes. We have 35 minutes.
Okay, I can continue. So right now, there's the international redress movement. In the 1980s, a coalition of Korean and Japanese women's groups initiated the conflict women redress movement within the global context of feminist and grassroots politics. The Japanese government initially denied any involvement with conflict women, but it was forced to change that position when Kim Ha-sung came forward to testify publicly. And that same year, in December 1991, Kim and other 2 Korean women survivors filed a lawsuit against the Japanese government in Tokyo District Court and asking for apology and compensation. And the Japanese newspaper Asahi Shimbun in 1992 reported Chuo University professor Yoshimi Yoshiaki's findings on documentary evidence. So the survivors' testimony plus the documentary evidence forced the Japanese government to change their position. Based on the Japanese government conducted 2 reports, 2 investigations, and based on the investigation reports, Chief Cabinet Secretary Kono Yohei stated that Japanese imperial forces had been involved directly or indirectly in the establishment and administration of conflict stations, and that there had been cases in which women had been gathered against their will. You might find the wording is pretty unnatural, but that's the translation. They try to make the wording sort of ambiguous to avoid clear legal responsibilities. The Kono statement was criticized by Japanese scholars. First of all, the statement implied that the main perpetrators of the conflict stations had been private traders, and that the government involvement was largely tangential. And second, the statement paid little attention to the conflict women of other ethnic groups and national backgrounds, except for Korean women. And third, the report failed to recognize the matter as a war crime and constituting a crime violation of international law. Nor did it specify any government plans for further investigation and compensation. So, with compensating the formal conflict women, Japanese government's position has not really changed. Actually, in recent years, it's going backwards. Even, going away from that Kono statement. The Japanese government maintained that Japan had settled all claims of compensation through the San Francisco Peace Treaty and various bilateral agreements with other nations. However, under the increasing international and domestic pressure, in 1995, the coalition cabinet of socialist Murayama Tomiichi government announced the establishment for Citizens Asian Peace Fund for Women, often called Women's Fund, to raise funds through private donors for surviving conflict women. So you can see this action evoked a lot of protest. Many survivors refused to accept money from the Women's Fund. The Women's Fund has been criticized by both Japanese nationalists for paying compensation in practice and by progressive intellectuals for not paying official compensation. So it's a very peculiar situation. Professor Takemai Eiji commented, I don't need to read it, how it's on the slide. Basically, he thinks this is Japan's effort is definitely not enough, and compared with Germany, Japan did little to take his war responsibility. According to the Women's Fund, the record of the Women's Fund, during its 12 years of operation from 1995 to 2007, it had raised about 565 million yen from citizen donors to fund the compensation, in addition to the approximately 750 million yen given by the government to fund medical welfare and support. But these funds were given not as compensation for war crime. That is the problem. The formal conflict women's lawsuit, you probably already heard about them, right? I want to go faster on this part. There are totally 10 lawsuits by women from different countries. Chinese women filed 5 lawsuits, including one from Taiwan. But Japanese government have denied all of them. This is a picture of Liu Mianhuan, the story I shared with you earlier. She was kidnapped at the age of 16 in front of her mother's eyes. She was crying when the court announced the denial, dismissal of their claim. I would like to say that the Japanese citizens groups, lawyers, and scholars has been working with victims from all countries, including Chinese survivors, to support their lawsuit. This is a Japanese lawyer, Omori Noriko. Her meeting with the Chinese attorney Kang Jian at the United Nations First World Conference on Women in Beijing led to the transnational collaboration representing the Chinese conflict women. Attorney Omori views her efforts to support the Chinese victims as a meaningful service to her own country as well. She said, "I'm doing this in the long-term interest of Japan. Only by facing the history with a serious and proper attitude can Japan attain long-time prosperity." Very well said. And this following picture is Professor Oyama Hiroshi. He has been supporting Chinese war victims, not only conflict women, but all other groups of war victims in the past decades. And he became the first foreign national chosen to receive the Persons Who Moved Old China Award. What time is it now? Yeah. So I just want to mention a little bit more. Even though there's a redress movement, transnational effort from people from all countries, not only Asian countries, but also around the world, United States, Europe, right, all other countries. But denial of the war crime continues. Just recently, you probably heard about the report of the San Francisco conflict woman statue, right, unveiled not long ago, right? And there were protests from Japanese officials, and the mayor of Osaka threatened to cut the citizenship relationship between Osaka and San Francisco, so on and so forth. So currently, I just came from a meeting last week in New York. Researchers gathered from Japan, Korea, and the United States discussing the 27 years of conflict redress movement. People are in agreement that everybody feel very concerned about what happened in Japan. because they're going further, the government officials going further to remove the information about the comfort woman from Japanese school textbook and from the site where the comfort woman memorial was established. But we were also very optimistic because the education is continuing, and more comfort woman memorials have been established in all around the world. In the United States and Canada, right now there are 13 of them. So when denial voice increase, that remind people not to forget. The most important thing to cite a survivor's word that is put on the inscription of San Francisco Comfort Woman Memorial, that the worst fear of the survivor is that their painful experience will be forgotten. So what we need to do, and I hope my book can help in a small part, is to help educate our people for generations to come to remember what happened in the past and to make sure that that kind of atrocity will not happen again, not to anyone. I think I should stop here and leave some time for discussion.
Thank you, Professor Chiu, for a very touching talk. And it's never a happy topic. It's never a happy topic for us. Because we are talking about the torturing experience of comfort women. We must thank you. We really appreciate the painstaking efforts of you and your collaborators in the long journey of identifying the victims, interviewing the victims, lots and lots of different forms of investigation, countless field trips, and documentary research. You have done all these in search of historical truth. So we appreciate very much. Yeah, so thank you. I'm sure that your monumental work will continue to inspire and impact future scholarship. So let's open up the discussion to the floor. Yeah, is that okay? Yeah. Would you like to collect all the questions first, and then you can reply, respond collectively, or would you like one-to-one conversation? What would you like?
Maybe one at a time. Or
one at a time.
Otherwise, I probably don't
Forget.
remember.
Yeah. Okay. So the floor is the discussion is now open to the floor. Yeah. Any questions? Yeah. Yes. Please kindly identify yourself.
Kate. My name is Kate Whitehead. I'm a journalist. I just wondered what happened when the comfort woman became pregnant in the comfort stations, and then what's happened to the children of the comfort women? How have they been treated or within their society?
Right. There's all different kind of situations. There were report for Japanese comfort woman who had a baby, and she was able to visit in Shanghai. She was able to hire a local woman to take care of the child, and at the end of the war, took the child back to Japan. And there was a report of a Chinese comfort woman in South China who got pregnant, and she was killed because Japanese forces wouldn't allow a child born between a soldier and a Chinese comfort woman. And there's also Japanese soldiers' recollection. This isn't included in my book, but I mentioned that because it's a hearsay. Japanese soldier said what he heard during the war. There's no documents, evidence. But the fact that the story was told among soldiers reflect the situation at the time. This soldier's name is Tang Qi. He said during the war, the women prisoners, there was no special prison for Chinese women POW. So where do they send these POW? They send them to frontline strongholds and barracks and confine them there to be the comfort women. And of course, there's no measure to prevent pregnant. Some women got pregnant. Sorry. And this is Japanese soldier's words. He said these women taken out to be used as a target to practice violence. And the baby and the woman was killed together. And he said that nobody knows exactly how many women were killed that way. He said it must be tens of thousands. So that's the situation.
Yes, please.
Thank you, Professor Bei, for your book and also presentation. And I definitely understand the emotional gravity of doing such research. My question is more about how to move on and, in a way, to prevent, history to repeat itself. So I was thinking, throughout the world, students do learn a bit of world history. And as we hear in Hong Kong, we also learn a lot of world history, First and Second World War, so on and so forth. And sometimes history, how to curate and how to coin history is important. So I was wondering, when we learned world history, we did learn a lot about what happened in Auschwitz, in Poland, so on and so forth. So I was wondering, such crime, would it be possible that we as a whole, the world population, manage to recognize and even remember this atrocity that did happen in history? And can something be worked out? And who exactly controls, frankly, the content of history? What goes into history book? That's my question.
I'm not sure if I'm able to answer this big question, very important question, and very good question. I think that's a question we should ask for ourselves, and it's a question we should raise to the authority. As you said, when we're constructing the historical truth, there's different narratives. There's narratives of nation state. There's narratives of history denialists. There's narratives of survivors, and narratives of scholars and legal specialists. Oftentimes, they conflict with each other. One of the arguments by the history denialists is that the woman's oral accounts is not accurate because they are not, many of them not educated, didn't receive good education, didn't have a chance to receive good education. They were old, and the event happened a long time ago. The memories and reliable human memory is subjective. These are all true. However, when reconstructing historical truth, whose words counts is a larger story. And in terms of Chinese comfort woman's voice, their narrative, because they were abducted from their hometown, their experience were all witnessed by the local people. So each of the survivors' story, their experience was verified based on other eyewitness accounts and the local war history. So that's why some reviewers feel that this is very powerful testimonies, because the unique situation. These women suffered a lot, but their experience is also undeniable. You can't make up a story when you have a lot of neighbors surrounding you, right? Yeah. So, but on the other hand, the Chinese researchers is also making effort to unearth more documentary evidences. Like after the book published recently, I heard that the Jilin Provincial Archives in China just published the Japanese military police headquarters documents. These documents were created by Japanese military men themselves. At the end of the war, there was a huge effort on the Japanese part to destroy all the criminal evidences. However, because Changchun, the early capital of Manchukuo, was captured by a lightning offensive of Chinese and Soviet joint army, so some part of the documents were not able to be destroyed. They were buried on the ground. And these documents was preserved in Jilin Provincial Archives now. And they recently released 25 of the files concerning conflict women. Some of them are the military police report 2 months after the Nanjing massacre on how the troops established conflict station rapidly, and what's the ratio at the time between one woman and the troops. So these are undeniable evidence showing that from the beginning, conflict woman system was not accident. It's well planned. There's also, among the 25 files, there's also interesting type of files called monthly male inspection report. These reports are the military policemen's report copied some seized letter written by Japanese soldiers or military men, officers. Whenever the letter mentions conflict station, number of conflict women, or the soldiers complained about how the military officer used the conflict station and abused their power, the letter was not allowed to send back to Japan. And either the entire letter destroyed or the relevant part is cut. So you can see evidence was concealed deliberately. And now when Japanese government claim there's no evidence, they don't have ground.
Any more questions? Yes. May I just ask a question? How do you feel? Professor Chiu, if I may ask a question, how do you feel that your book will be received in, say, Japan? What would be your feeling in terms of what you've described?
Right. I haven't been to Japan after the book published yet. So, but I have friends among Japanese scholars, and I use my book in my classroom. And among my students, there are Japanese students. And I gave lectures in different places, and there were Japanese people in the audience. The response I heard so far from Japanese people have been very positive. I have audience came up to hug me with tears and thank me for telling the stories. I have a student who came to my office after my lecture and also cried, say, we didn't know about that, and thank you for writing about it. I'm sure I saw that, I gave a talk at the Voice of America, and the transcript is posted online, and there's all comments, right? There's some comments that sooner or later, Pepe Chu will, I don't remember exact wording, will know what the Iris Zhang experienced or something like that. There definitely will be comments like that. I can see on Amazon There's a 5-star reviews and 1 star from name, like a Japanese name, say, oh, this is a PRC propaganda. But my book has nothing to do with government. You can see how I started to write about it. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, my name is Lei Genghee. I would like to know, during the Japanese occupation in the World War II in Hong Kong, it's altogether 3 years and 8 months. Could you tell me something about the comfort stations here, the number of it, and a general picture of it?
Would you say it again? Sorry, I missed the part of the question.
The general picture of the comfort stations in Hong Kong
In Hong Kong,
from 1941 to 1945.
I have to admit,
3 years and 8 months altogether.
I have to admit I don't have rich information about Hong Kong, but I read some report that there were comfort stations. Yeah. That is a part of the information. My book focusing on mainland China. I wrote in the introduction. It doesn't include any information of Taiwan and Hong Kong, although I mentioned some cases, but I didn't give an overall outline. Because there's some English publication in Taiwanese comfort women already. So my book is focusing on the part that is not English.
Did you look into the involvement of the Chinese collaborators with the Japanese government in setting up this kind of comfort stations? I'm pretty sure that the so-called Hanjiang,
Right.
Hanggang, have a great involvement. So we're not just pointing our fingers at the Japanese. We have to look into the Chinese collaborators as well.
Right. I did have that, I think quite a few pages discussing that. This is also one of the aspects that is not very well examined before. But I did give examples. The collaboration during the war is also a complicated issue. It is not a one clear-cut situation. There were active collaboration. Like there's a collaborator named Qiao Hongnian, I mentioned his name in my book, who helped the Japanese army set up more than one comfort station in Nanjing, and tried to profit from that and helped victimize the woman. And this man was prosecuted after the war. There's also collaboration, forced collaboration. Like there's a report, a village head, who were ordered by Japanese army to submit a woman to the soldiers, and the woman, the village head, under the pressure, have no choice, and decided to submit his own wife first. And his wife heard about that, commit suicide. So did he collaborate? He did, right? But oftentimes there's a situation that the army, occupation army, threatened, if you don't follow the order, the entire village will be killed. That did happen in sometimes in Sanguang 3-0 policy in China. Burn all, kill all, and loot all, right? There's a situation that the entire village and all the women were raped and the house burned down. So these collaborators, they cannot use the pressure as excuse to say that they did nothing wrong. They have to take their own responsibility for the crime they did. But the overall picture was still clear. The forces that ultimately responsible for the atrocity is the Japanese invasion army.
But those private brothels were not closed down altogether, right? In those years.
Right. Yeah, that's another question. The question concerning the type for military comfort stations. The military comfort stations is not one kind. Because of the complication, there's denial that they're not sexual slavery, they are brothels. There were private run comfort stations used by military. And there were military comfort stations directly set up by the troops and supervised by the military personnel. And there were temporary comfort stations, very fluid and informal, set up by the frontline troops everywhere they stationed. And they are also the old pre-war brothels turned into comfort stations. So situation varied, but the comfort woman system sanctioned the sexual violence and institutionalized it, make the soldier feel more entitled. Since in the front line they don't have formal comfort station, they feel they are entitled to just adopt local women and keep them as a temporary sex slaves. So that's the horrible picture, I think.
Next question.
Yeah, hi, my name is Roy Delmick. Thank you very much for your moving presentation. My question concerns the historical denialists, in Japan. How much cooperation, support, collaboration is there between those folks and historical denialists in other countries?
You mean collaboration between Japanese?
Yeah, right-wing nationalists, who deny history, and right-wing nationalists in other countries, the U.S., Germany, wherever. Do you see any of that?
I do see that occasionally you saw, for example, YouTube, there's apparently American face, right, talking about why you attack Japan. This thing happened everywhere. It's just a phenomena, common military misconduct happened to every country. Why you make it? So I'm sure Japanese government, I don't have accurate information. That's why I didn't mention. But I hear some researchers from South Korea and Japan say Japanese government have a huge fund for the denial campaign. So that definitely will earn them some supporters from abroad. Right.
One, two. Yes, I was wondering how were comfort women treated by Chinese after the war. For example, in France, any French woman suspected to have any contact with German will be shamed in public or shaved and stoned for years. So how was it in China?
Similar. That's one of the reasons these survivors were silenced. They didn't speak out. They were discriminated. Some were persecuted. In the book, I mentioned some cases that they were punished for having, been serving as a Japanese troops comfort woman. They were considered collaborators. So the patriarchal ideology combined with the political prejudice made the woman's life very difficult. Yeah. Even today, researchers believe there are still women who didn't tell, even to their family members. They didn't want to, as you said, rape victims often feel shame, even without this kind of context, right? In any country, any culture. And in China, that kind of political pressure is huge.
Thank you, Professor Chiao. Thanks for your work. I've got two questions. You just mentioned about the 1 to 29 ratio, yes, in the comfort stations.
Right.
Is it particularly high for the combatant nations? Because it seems that we heard about the notoriety of the comfort women system, but I'm sure that the other countries must have some kind of similar sexual slavery or brothel system as the 129 very high? And my second question is, apart from, we heard sometime about Korea, apart from San Francisco statues, we also heard about the statue in Korea, which is a girl, I'm not sure whether I'm mistaken or not, it's about a victim of the I think it's a comfort woman. It's a statue, South Korea facing against Japanese embassy, and then they have a very big
Consular General.
yes, row about it, and the Japanese was threatening and making the Koreans remove the statues. Apart from Korea, do the other victim nations like China, Taiwan, do they have anything in the redressing movement at all?
Yeah. So the first question about the ratio, right? Again, just like the type of comfort station different in different places, even the same places with different type of comfort stations, the ratio is also very different from place to place. For example, the Japanese military police report recently released by the Jilin Provincial Archives mentioned that the Japanese military officer literally wrote the report. The ratio in one place is 1 comfort woman to 276. That's at the very beginning of the full-scale war. So they apparently know that this ratio is too high, right? So they're mentioning in the notes, we are, increasing the number of comfort stations and comfort women. But in other places, for example, in the military barracks, the stronghold, usually the stronghold itself is only stationed dozens of military men, right? But they can, kidnap as many as they want. Local women, and local people have no power, right? So in that case, the ratio can be very low. So that's why I personally think that the accurate estimate for the total number is literally impossible. But we do not dwell on the number issue, so they nowadays use that as attack, excuse to attack. How did you get the number, right? But it's not exaggeration to say the number is very large. Yeah. What's the second question?
Are there any of the victim countries like China, Taiwan, like the other Southeast Asian countries doing anything to help about the redress?
Right. I think South Korea movement is most active and organized, and they have the monthly demonstration in 2 decades, over 1 decade, right? Many times regularly. China, there's a comfort woman statue established in Shanghai Normal University. I think Professor Su Zhiliang, played a role in that. But not as many as South Korea. And there was no demonstration that I know. Yeah.
So in the interest of time, one last question, if any. One last question. Yes.
Following on that, why do you think there's a lack of Chinese boys?
Lack of Chinese voice?
Yes.
Yeah, that's a very good question. Lack of Chinese voice is not within China. Within China, there's many publications. Of course, it started later than South Korea and Japan and other countries, but it did many volunteers. It's not only 1-2 scholars. I mentioned some scholars more often than others, but it's nationwide, many volunteers from different professions. People devote time, including lawyers who help the victim to file claims, and school teachers, college professors. But the lack of voice I'm talking about is it wasn't the English book or articles even on Chinese comfort women. Before this book published, this is the first English monograph. And I don't think there's another one out yet, right? It's still the only one. Yeah. I do hope when I wrote the book, I was hoping that some historians are writing more on that. That's possible.
interesting topic, and I'm sure the conversation will go on. Thank you.
Thank you.
Actually, I have one question.
Okay, of course.
I think I can indulge. The question is there more continued research on the second book? Some more information that's coming out? Are you laying the groundwork for a second version, a second book?
That's a very good question. I'm debating. I'm still hoping some historians are working on that. When I start to write Comfort Woman book, I received the National Endowment for Humanities Fellowship for a different project on my field of literary studies. So I haven't finished that, so I'm obliged to finish that. But since my book came out, it kind of will draw a lot of attention. So right now I'm still called by colleagues to attend the conference and give paper presentation or participate in panels. Like last week I just presented a paper. That paper might be included in the published volume. But I haven't started a book project yet.
Well, hopefully as more of your book gets circulated globally, more people might actually start speaking up, taking the opportunity, and add to your research.
I want to thank you and the Hong Kong University Press for helping that. The Hong Kong University Press, as I said, published 2 of the editions, English and the Chinese. The Chinese edition is for people outside mainland, in traditional characters. Thank you.
A pleasure. And I'd like to present a gift to both our professors for coming and joining us. They are replicas of our oldest book here in Hong Kong U Libraries, a Hong Kong almanac from 1846.
Thank you.
Thank you to you ladies. Thank you. And if the audience maybe come to a few more minutes, there is a survey on your seat. If you can help me complete that, just to give me some feedback on the talk. Also, just to let you know, currently we have 3 exhibits going on concurrently. The 90th anniversary of the Chinese School, its footprints, is currently on the 2nd floor exhibition area. We also have a preservation series exhibition on level 3 showing recent design bindings. And we also have an exhibition about our new renovations for the 2nd floor and for the ground floor. They're very exciting, and I think the students are going to be very happy what we do with creating some new learning commons. Upcoming exhibitions, starting from the 27th of October, is the Equal Opportunities Library Book Exhibition in support of our Equal Opportunities Office Count Me In Festival. We also have a collaboration with the Consulate General of Peru, Memory of Peru, 1890 to 1950. That's from the 13th to the 30th of October. It's a photographic exhibition of all the golden age of Peruvian times. To complement the exhibition, we will have our next book talk is The Silver Way, China, Spain, America, China, Spain, America, and the Birth of Globalization, 1565 to 1815. That'll be held on the 15th of November. From the 4th to the 22nd of December, we will have a rare manuscript exhibition, basically paper and ink, Ming and Qing Dynasty manuscripts from our Fengping Shan Library collection. And in January, we will have an exhibition, Housing of Last Resort, Home Improvements of Hong Kong Subdivided Flats, by the Faculty of Architecture here at Hong Kong U under the Urban Ecologies and Design Lab. And that'll be from the 8th of January to the 31st of January. So this concludes this evening's book talk. Thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you very soon at our next event and definitely our next book talk. Have a good evening.